Hey everyone, welcome to my channel, Books, Scurs, and Purrs. My name's Leslie, and today I'm going to be reviewing the third episode of Interview with a Vampire, entitled, Is My Very Nature That of the Devil? I've watched every single episode twice, and I've already watched the fourth episode, so hopefully I keep everything together. The episode opens on the past with Louis and Lestat sitting on a bench. Louis is reading a book about naturalism. Lestat is reading the news, and that leads them to a discussion about the nature of being a vampire. And so the struggle that Louis has is that he wants an approach where he's only eating out of just pure sustenance and not necessarily not killing people, but trying to take it on as morality in a way. You know, let's only eat like the bad people wherever he deems are like a bad person. And Lestat is way more the opposite spectrum. He's just so hedonistic. He wants to live life purely for pleasure. So they really have like two opposing views on how to approach being a vampire. And so Lestat indulges Louis and just decides to go on with this experiment, right? So they go on the hunt for someone that's considered a baddie, and Lestat, being the gentleman that he is, Lestat prepares what he calls criminal biscuits. He snaps some guy's spine in order for Louis to drink his blood, because the guy's still alive. And that's when Louis' true at heart nature for himself comes out, and that's the fact that he just can't do it. He can't bring himself to kill someone else, so he just grabs the nearest animal nearby and starts munching away. So that really forces Louis to say his truth, how he feels about being a vampire and how they go about being a vampire. And killing baddies just isn't going to do it. The next scene, we see Lestat and Louis at the Azalea Hall, and there's still some tension between them. And so Lestat kind of picks a little bit of a fight with a jazz singer, and this leads Louis to have a conversation as we have the next scene back in Dubai, in like modern current times, where Louis is claiming that Lestat composed Wolverine blues. And this is another moment in this episode pretty early on, just much like the second episode, where we see that Louis is not a reliable narrator. He's claiming things that if someone did some digging into, might be able to find out that what he's saying is either not true or something questionable. And so the more I think about this and I reflect on the book and how Daniel Malloy, as an older character in the show, is pointing out that there's inconsistencies between both interviews, I wonder if the inconsistencies have to do with, I'm assuming that Louis in the show has rekindled a romance that we just don't know about. We don't see that yet. That's what I'm thinking about. Maybe he's rekindled a relationship with Lestat, and so now that he's retelling a story, he's seeing it a bit more with rose-colored glasses, even though he has a incredibly complicated relationship with Lestat. So that's kind of on my mind. And on top of that, I think Louis says, I hope I wrote it down. I think he dubs what he's doing as the Odyssey of recollection, something of that nature. But there is intent behind what he's saying, so even him saying that is questionable in a way. The story continues with Louis and Lestat going home, and Lestat has brought the singer Antoinette with them, And so he's clearly engaging himself with Antoinette, and Louis is also not really fully invested in that part of his relationship. So he goes out to eat because he's hungry, and when he leaves, he says something to Lestat, something to the effect of, enjoy yourself, it's the purpose of living. And that really is just another nod to the beginning of the episode, where Lestat's making it very apparent that he's just this hedonistic being, you know, and that's how he likes to live his life. And that's something that Louis just can't really get on board with, and it seems like he's on edge with that in a way. But I also think that's why Lestat also very much creates the issues in his relationship. Okay, that's loud. At this point, we already know Louis and Lestat are not sleeping together, but Lestat has already put it on the table that they can have this open relationship. And when Louis asks for permission, I love this scene because Lestat says 4 different ways and facial expressions of saying, of course you can. And it was just such a good scene. You get to see the actor saying of course and not being okay, and then trying to like course correct that he's okay with what Louis is asking for, which is just so funny. It's so not okay. But once again, Lestat just can't be I don't know what it is. He's just not a good communicator. The next scene is at Azalea Hall, and 4118 ordinance has kicked in, and the very people that are in partnership with Louis as well as his clientele. I'm sorry, there's a motorcycle. I swear it's the same one. Louis' partners and clientele are the very same people that are voting for this ordinance that hurts Louis' business and all his staff. So really this is just another way, I believe, to implement segregation. And we really get to see the entitlement and racism and hypocrisy of his partners as they're at a poker table with Louis, and they're making it pretty clear that they're the ones that implemented this or pushed for this, but also blaming higher ups and government. Sorry, there's so much noise outside. I'm trying my nuts. And very specifically, Mr. Fenwick is the one that really pushed for this all to happen. The next scene is Louis runs into an old high school lover, and they catch up together. They go to the bayou together so that they can be intimate with one another without the prying eyes of others, or at least that was the intent. And then they go their separate ways. The next scene is Louis goes home to Lestat, who you know is already fishing around for information and asking how his night went. You know, he's just, you could tell something's bothering him, but he doesn't really want to say it. So with this growing tension, Lestat wants to give an olive branch to Louis and wants to take him out for a date. And Louis does agree, but he's like, hey, I have to see my family first. And so we could still see the irritation with Lestat. But the more I see Lestat's character while he's irritated with this ongoing tension, I realize that he's just really possessive, you know? And so I understand that he may think that Louis staying connected to parts of humanity is a problem. And although he is right in some aspects, he's not allowing the person that he's with to slowly disengage with his family, like in his own terms. He just like wants them to just cut them off already, and that's clearly a problem. But that's not really said. It's just Lestat giving a look, and Sam Reed does some incredible acting along Jacob Anderson. The next scene is back in modern times in Dubai, with Luis Daniel Malloy. And so the past, the memory, is broken up in this moment because Daniel Malloy points out that the boots that Louis was talking about that Lestat were wearing were muddy. And so here again, we're having Daniel Malloy pierce the narrative that Luis is presenting, because was it raining that day? Was it not? And that's not something that Luis really wants to confirm, even though we get like a flash of the past and see that it's dry, it's raining. He's not quite sure. So once again, how can we know if we could really truly rely on his narrative? Something else I noticed in this scene is that Rashid was lingering, which Luis does point out, but I just constantly wonder about what Rashid's agenda is. If anybody knows, tell me below. I don't remember him being a character in the books, and I can't think of several characters Rashid might be a composite of. The only idea I do have is that maybe he's a part of the Telemasca. Maybe he branched out from there. That's the only thing I could think of at the moment. The next scene is back in the past, and Louis is visiting his family, and his mother really doesn't want him there now. And you just see just right off the bat, he's so defensive and just physically wants to push himself into his family home, which is really just him wanting to force himself into their lives when they know something's up with him, like something's not right. And in doing so, he like kicks down the door, but in a way that's so forceful and so powerful, and he just ends up scaring his own family. So that really severs the ties between him and his family in a way that it seems like there's no way to go back. There's a gulf between them. Something else that I noted, and I try to save my questions for the end, but I don't want to forget. Luis's sister has twins, and I wonder, I don't know how, this is a total guess. I wonder if Claudia is going to kill the twins, or if those are the twins basically that Claudia is going to use to persuade Lestat to drink dead blood. So that's what I'm thinking. Louis goes back home to Lestat, and if he just like is at an all-time peak of frustration and hurt over his family and everything else that's going on in his life. And here's Lestat with his drama. He has the whole home filled with military men. And so this is just a classic example of Lestat being dramatic and not talking about what's bothering him, and instead just making this really dramatic display. Louis has Lestat dismiss everyone with his supernatural powers. And I don't know how to say this, but he just makes them leave. And I wonder if that power that Lestat is exhibiting is even in the books, because I don't remember his powers working that way, but there's definitely more telepathy and powers of manipulation that Lestat has that I don't think he really had in the book, but I could be wrong. So Lestat and Louis have the row of a lifetime, which I could say for any of their arguments in their relationship. And Lestat finally admits that he's jealous. He doesn't want Louis to be with anyone else, which is ridiculous. It's funny. It's unreasonable. And what's so incredibly funny of that moment is the only argument he really has about his relationship with Antoinette versus his relationship with, Louis's relationship with a past lover, Jonah, is that Louis has feelings for Jonah, but Lestat doesn't have any feelings for Antoinette. And very simply, it's just different, and that's hilarious. That is like the most hilarious, selfish argument. And I couldn't stop laughing over that. It's just so, there's so much tension between them, and it's also really ridiculous all at the same time. But through this argument, we also see that Louis is hurling his pain at Lestat. He's blaming him for his brother's death, his family's disconnection from him, the ruining of his business. There's just all these things that he's building up inside, but he very specifically blames Lestat in a way that I don't think is really fair. And the fact that he brings up his brother as death as a reason to be upset with Lestat kind of makes me circle back to the books and how some fans think that Lestat's responsible in some way for his brother's Paul's death. And I just I don't know, I don't think they're really playing it that way in the show, but anyways, I just think Louis is doing a lot of projecting. So the next scene, Lestat and Louis are having a business meeting with their other partners, and Mr. Fenwick and the guy Tim, I don't remember his whole name, but still saying, you know, the impact of Ordinance 4118. And so we see this toggling between what they're saying to Louis, which is really just gaslighting him and not taking responsibility for what they're doing, as well as their inner thoughts, which are saying quite the opposite. They're well aware of what they're doing. And so this upsets Louis because he's listening into their thoughts. And I find it really suspect that as soon as Louis addresses Tim as just Tim, Fenwick's character comes at Louis as if he's misaddressing him. He expects him to say sir after his name. And I really appreciate the callback to, I think, episode 2, where Louis brings up that he just has spent a lifetime of having to be careful and overly courteous in order to be not accepted, but like to navigate the world that he's in and how he's treated, which is just he's constantly being undermined. And so I appreciated that they're showing an example of like the micro aggressions that Louis always has to deal with. So Louis is just at a point where he's starved, he's angry, he's frustrated, he's probably really sad, just having all these emotions, you know, with everything that's going on in his life, personally and professionally. And that all comes out, he takes it all out on Fenwick with his vampire powers. And it's one of those rare moments that you really see Louis really accept who he is and use his power, because there's no really, he doesn't have an outlet. He really doesn't have an outlet. Like he can't control the world. He can't change it either with everything that's going on. And so we see that he murders Fenwick and then makes a grand public display horrifically of his body and puts a sign on him. I think it said something like whites only, as a reference to the segregation and the dismantling of the businesses that's going on. And so then there's this immediate reaction from the authorities, and they just start tearing apart Storyville. So it's not his fault. It's reactionary to what he's going through, and that there's no way, again, for him to have an outlet or a change of what's going on. So here he is still upset that there's no solution. He's just still upset and frustrated and hurt and all these things. In the meantime, Lestat is so ecstatic that he's finally in some way embraced his vampire self, or that Louis has embraced his vampire self. And it's just that continued conflict of Lestat once again not seeing or not willing to see what Louis is going through. And I just don't want to say about the relationship or the division of the family, but very specifically what world they're living in and how it doesn't even matter. It's like inconsequential that Louis has these vampire powers. It's like he uses it, but it's like, what is it for if it just breathes bigger destruction, you know? And this is where Louis says something that I don't think I could forgive. He tells Lestat something cruel, but it's so specifically something that Louis knows will hurt him. And that's him telling Lestat, we're never going to work and you will always be alone. And he knows that from the beginning of their relationship, that's something that Lestat made it really clear. He was very vulnerable about being alone, being lonely, and that it's insufferable. So I don't know. I think it was just like a petty moment that Louis had of just wanting to see Lestat in pain in some way, to have him feel what he feels in a way. So he takes off, and at the end of the episode, we see that Louis meets who he calls his salvation, which is Claudia, and that's how it ends. But on that last phrase, I feel like we see Louis just making another error. You know, he was living a difficult human life and he wanted an escape, so he became a vampire. He's having a difficult life even though he's a vampire, so then he wants to make another vampire. So it's just like this really terrible cycle. I don't even know what to say about that, but it's definitely creating more of the same problems. So that was the end of the episode. I'm thoroughly loving this show. Again, each episode I've seen twice already. I'm going to do the same thing with every episode, I think, before I shoot a video. And what else did I want to mention? AMC also has a podcast with one of my favorite comedians, Naomi Epikurian. She's so funny. She has two other podcasts. One is Couples Therapy, and the other one, I don't know the name, but it's where she reviews Lifetime movies with another comedian friend of hers, and that's also funny. So the fact that she's the host of a podcast about Interview the Vampire just set me over the moon. I just felt like two of my lovely worlds were like colliding together. So if you love Interview the Vampire, you're definitely going to enjoy that podcast. I've been listening to it, and what's also great about that podcast is that each episode seems to be behind the current episode. So in case you haven't had a chance to catch up to the show, you're not going to be exactly spoiled with whatever just came out. Anyways, I think that's everything I could think of. If you have any questions or anything else you want to comment below, I like to just engage in conversations about the show because I got to talk to someone about it. So go ahead, like, subscribe, comment, and I'll see you later.